Oh,
Where'd that voice go? The voices in my head. I better turn those things off or they're gonna be dinging the whole time. People log in.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
what is that?
Huh?
They
It's-
enter
and when
the
they enter the room, they got to turn that
Oh.
off. Otherwise, every time someone logs in, they're
Well,
We can hear you speaking.
good morning. How
Oops.
about a little song this morning? Good morning. I'm just singing all the time. What is your favorite good morning song?
I don't know if I have one.
Think fast.
The only one that comes to my mind is good morning, good morning, good morning.
The sun will come shining through. Good morning. Good morning to you. And you.
morning,
Yes.
everyone. Good morning.
Who sang that song? Isn't that from a
Isn't it
movie?
like is that Oklahoma?
I think
That's
is it
my
Oklahoma?
pride.
I think it is Oklahoma.
Somebody
Good
online.
morning.
Yeah. If anyone online knows the song, good morning.
Can you hear me?
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning,
Oh,
Ed.
good-
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Can
You
you
are
hear me?
live on so everybody can hear you. So just wanted you to know that. Thanks for joining
So
us, Ed.
continue singing, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
John?
Can you hear
So
me?
it's good to
Can you
start.
hear
Good
me?
morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Around the Valuation World, Thursday morning of conference edition. Appreciate those of you who traveled to Salt Lake to join us for our conference, and also for those of you who are joining us online. Good morning. Thank you for registering and participating in our show. Around the Valuation World is a benefit of membership with the NACVA. We produce this show monthly for 2 hours, where we invite experts to speak to our profession, our membership, about what's happening in various aspects of our profession, industries, theory, approach, databases, just resources, things that are happening in the profession. And this morning we have a really great show with you. We'll be speaking with Trish Garthefner and Josh Horn from NACVA Standards Board about some of the work that they've done over the past 2 years to provide resources to U.S. members and the profession at large. We'll have a segment on healthcare from Todd Zagrang and Jessica Bailey-Wheaton. And also joining us at the end of the show, the ever popular topic du jour, cannabis, what's happening in the world of cannabis and valuation. So we'll start this morning with Trish and Josh. Josh, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Brian?
Good morning. Yes, we can. And Trish, good morning.
Good morning.
Josh Horn is the recent past chair of NACVA's Standards Board, and Trish is the current chair of NACVA Standards Board. For the past many years, the board has worked in publishing a comparison chart for North American and international business valuation standards organizations. This year, they've taken on a pretty big project to tackle the glossary of valuation terms across the North American valuation organizations and the international organizations. And we'll hear a bit more about that from these two awesome leaders. So, Josh, what is the history of the Standards Board publishing these comparison charts?
So we developed these in 2017. That was prior to my involvement in the Standards Board directly, and then they were published in 2018. So they were developed in 2017, published in 2018. And we've had a few updated versions since then. The most recent version, Trish, can you tell me which one was dropped, the date of the most recent one? Because we just dropped another one. And so we've got one very recent.
Beginning of 2022. And also, Josh,
Okay.
I think we had talked about this before. The first standards committee, I think is what the group was called at the time in 2006, 2007.
Okay.
Carl Steffen had pointed out, I think to us, that there was Mark Cusick and Mark Hansen had put together a standards comparison chart that was at that time in Excel. And I think it had been released at one of the conferences. And then a couple years later, Zach Myers joined, and then it was revised again. And now it's as it appears today.
Yeah, there were, before the standards board became a board, it was a committee for many years. And to your point, Mark Hansen, Mark Cusick, Bob Grossman were champions, pioneers of working with the other organizations in the US, the AICPA, the ASA, and the USPAP standards to pull those all together into a single resource. Now it's a board and the members are elected by our membership. And so if you're interested in getting involved in helping us keep the standards current, we have open nominations for our boards in the spring, elections also in the spring, and the board members serve a 3-year term. So, Krish, why are they so important, these standards?
I think they're important for a number of different reasons. One of which that comes to mind right away is litigation purposes. So whenever I have to go and testify, and I think a lot of my peers use it as well, and I've not only NACFA members, but non-NACFA members, I've pointed out that we have this resource available and that how useful it is, so that if we are testifying and the opposing expert is of a different VPO certification, that we can see the harmonization and the overlap of the standards and be able to look at their work product and ensure that everyone is in line with the standards that they need to follow. So that's the main reason that I find it to be important. But I also know that it's used for a number of different other purposes. Other professionals within the business valuation sector and related thereto can look at it and see the overlapping and the harmonization between the different VPOs.
Josh, what are some of the critical updates that were part or that are part of the updates to these charts this year?
Oh, Brian, you flipped these questions on us. You did these backwards. You're supposed to ask her those.
Sorry, Josh, I got that wrong.
I'm off the board for a little bit, and that was no. I'm just teasing. I will
I know
say,
you
I
are.
will say broadly, the primary updates were around the area of the international standards, and there was a lot of work done. Correct me if I'm wrong, Trish. IVSC and RICS. I think those we spent a lot of time going through those with our international partners and figuring out the changes there. There was not as much on the domestic side. There were a couple of cosmetic changes, I believe, on USPAP. And, I added a few. I worked on the AICPA section. There was some footnoting there. Did you want to jump in with anything else specific, Trish?
Yeah, Canada. So Catalina Miranda, right? CBV Institute. She supplied a number of different edits that we needed to apply. And that took a lot of assessing from, we got together different groups with the current vice chair, Minal Argwal of the Standards Board, and Zach Myers and Mark Cusick, and went over why initially in the Canadian CBV column, we had put the different standards that we saw correlated to the NACFA standard, and now how since it's changed. And I think that all kind of rolled into the international glossary, and the fact that CBV, as part of that working group, had been looking so closely at the standards that it was really like front of mind. So when we shared the standards comparison chart with the other VPOs, we got a lot more feedback this year than we had in years past, which is great.
The VPOs are valuation professional organizations. That's a term that you might be aware of, but we certainly adopted that term more as we were collaborating with the other organizations outside the US, particularly. Similar to the comparison charts, there's been a lot of work or commentary in our profession over the last year or 2 years about the glossary of valuation terms, which the NACVA got involved with. Trish, can you talk about that and how that project came around and the work that our standards board did with the other VPOs to address the chart for our members?
Sure. Yes. The initial international glossary of business valuation terms came out about 20 years ago. And so this working group that I referenced, that was CBV, RICS, TAKIM, ASA, and IVSC, They had revised and initially sent out a draft in 2020, I believe, to all of the VPOs and professionals. A number of professionals have provided all types of feedback. Took 2 years to get to the version that they published earlier this year in January 2022. And Carl Steffen, who is an integral part of the standards board for NACFA, is an advisor and has been on the board for many years as an advisor and initially as a member. He was the one who suggested that we take the glossary and do what we had done similarly with the standards comparison chart and have the NACFA standard or NACFA glossary terms that we have attached to the back of the standards and the furthest column to the left, and then other VPOs, domestic and international, and the comparison thereof of the different glossary terms. So that's how the project came about.
Josh, it was quite outstanding how the organizations, all the various organizations worked together on this project. What were some of the benefits you think came from that?
Well, I think that actually actively reaching out to the organizations across the world, we had some contacts. We more formalized those and solidified those, and worked with HQ to build some of those bridges to those other organizations, and that was important. Not the least of which was because we don't want to guess as to what they were thinking when they drafted their various terms and standards. So we, in essence, to the extent we could, put it in their court and said, okay, this is what we think you mean, and is that right? And allowed us to do it that way. So, I mean, Brian, I know you're more heavily involved in GACVA, and I know Zach Myers is too. That the building it globally has, I think, will continue to be a big benefit for NACVA.
Yeah, GACVA is the Global Association of Certified Evaluators and Analysts. NACVA is an organization that supports our international chapters who are credentialing designees and growing our membership outside of the US in a number of countries. And so it was, to Josh's point, it was important for us to not only address the standards, but the glossary of terms, because we have members outside of North America. And so to collaborate with those chapters and these organizations was super important. Trish and Josh, what are some other resources that our standards board, or talk about how our members can get access to these resources and some of the things that the board has done in recent years to support our organization?
I think my favorite one is the mentor program. So it's MSX, I think is the acronym. And I have made a number of friends through this program and have helped a number of different people through the years, one of which I had suggested be nominated for the NACFA Standards Board and was recently placed on the board, Nina Shaw. And I just find that resource to be very invaluable because it's mentoring through the program. But then also sometimes, like when Ninish reached out to me, it was a SPAC valuation. I had never done one before. So I got really mired into a type of valuation I'd never done before. So I was learning basically from him. So it's a win-win.
Mm-hmm. Josh?
Yeah, just if members aren't aware, just go to NACFA's website /standards, and all of these have been very well organized on there. So some of the ones that, I like all of it, but the one of the ones that has been invaluable, and Trish and I were involved in this, were the frequently asked questions. And we get a lot of inbound from members that cross right into those frequently asked questions. So people will call us, and we will continue to serve our membership with questions that don't meet the definitions, or basically the questions written in the FAQs. But I find that a lot of times the answers to the questions that they're asking are in those FAQs. And so please take a look at those. They're divided into litigation and non-litigation sections, which is also extremely helpful. As I spoke, we have our hotline, which you can call into HQ for questions. The standards resource tools, you do have to be logged in to get those. So that's helpful when you're conducting an engagement, making sure that you're in compliance with standards. I know I've integrated those into a lot of the templates I use to do engagements. So that's really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh and Trish and the members of our standards board and our other boards who work on various strategic and technical issues for our association. We appreciate you joining us this morning and for your hard work for our membership. Thanks both.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All
Thank you, Brian.
right. We are going to do a little switch-o, change-o, some soft shoe here on the stage and invite up Jessica Bailey Wheaton and Todd Zagrang.
And while we're doing that, Brian, can I just say something about the whole standards and the membership? So hopefully they hear this, is that if you all want to set yourself apart and step up your game and where you're at the leading edge of the industry, come to NACVA and ask where you can get involved. You got to be careful about that. I did that 20 some years ago. But the fact is that by being able to be on the standards board, being on the credentialing board, to be on the EAB, all those things set you apart. All those things will help in your practice development and how you're seen in the industry. And out of all the organizations, NACVA is a member supporting organization more so than anything else. So just
It's
my
true.
opinion and
Yeah.
from experience from too many years. So we're going to start, this section, we're going to talk about healthcare regulatory updates. And Michael Gregory, Mike, are you with us up
I am.
virtually?
I am here.
And good, welcome aboard. And Michael's going to interview our panelists on healthcare evaluations and updates. So take it away, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. You know, oftentimes you say it's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to introduce somebody. In this case, with Todd and Jessica, this truly is a pleasure. I've known Health Capital Consultants for over 30 years, and I've watched this firm grow, and I really have a tremendous respect for them. In terms of Todd Zingrang, he's the president of Health Capital Consultants, which specializes in valuation and financial analysis. They look at hospitals, physician practices, and other healthcare. He's got a whole host of credentials. He's an MBA, a CVA, number of other initials behind his name, 25 years of experience. He's a co-author of the Advisor's Guide to Healthcare and numerous articles. He's on the faculty with ASA, NACVA, and others. Oh, I see there's a poll question there. I'm sorry, let me get rid of that. Okay, hopefully I got rid of that. And then Jessica Bailey Wheaton. She's an attorney with Health Capital Consultants. She works with federal and state regulations on healthcare transition. She's an expert in this area. She deals with fair market value, commercial reasonableness. She heads up con and regulatory consulting. She's a co-author with numerous peer-reviewed and industry articles. She serves on the editorial board with NACVA. She's on Quick Read, and she's on numerous other boards. She's also a member of the bar in Illinois and Missouri. So what we have in front of us are two esteemed experts, I think two of the top people in the country relative to the issues on healthcare. And today they're going to be talking later on healthcare regulatory updates and valuation implications. But let me start off and say, given that presentation later today, why don't you tell us a little bit about your session and what will the attendees take away from this?
As you talked about, Michael, we're going to speak about regulatory issues in healthcare. You can't have one without the other. But so much of the work that we perform is driven by what's going on regulatory wise, which healthcare is probably one of the most regulated industries in the country. And there's a reason why 90% of our engagements are done through attorney-client privilege. So it's important where I bring my healthcare and valuation skills combined with Jessica's knowledge of the law, practicing attorney, like Michael said, in specializing in healthcare, that we perform our evaluations. And what you want to take away with from our session is try to be aware of the legal and regulatory implications of the work that we're doing. We don't want to issue an opinion that puts our clients in the wrong light, and we want to be aware of that. And that's kind of what we hope to, if anything, you take away from our presentation today is some of the regulatory issues that are becoming more prevalent in healthcare, because it changes all the time. That's really what drives the demand for the services that we're being asked to perform, is because the regulators tend to be a little more reactive than proactive. So the opinions that we issue are valid one day, and 6 months later, they're not. The regulators will find some kind of legal impermissibility in a relationship. And guess what? We have to do our work all over again. So it's kind of a make work relationship we have with regulators. So we appreciate that on some level.
Yeah, and so I think some of the, obviously, if you wanted to talk healthcare regulations, we could be here for the rest of the conference talking about it. But I think some of the things we're going to talk about today that we're seeing more and more are certainly antitrust and the government's regulation of both vertical and horizontal mergers. There's a lot of fodder coming out from the Biden administration and various agencies regarding that. It's certainly affecting the transactional landscape. We'll touch upon fraud and abuse laws, which is really the reason we both have jobs and do what we do. And then just talk a little bit about some of the other developments, the government is pushing in healthcare. So it'll kind of be a quick, hit on everything that's happened so far this year and where we think what that means for, the rest of this year and a little bit into next year.
Yeah, and try and take the temperature of where these trends are heading into the work we're doing. Because as valuation professionals, our jobs are in a way to be futurists and be able to anticipate the economic benefits of ownership of a business or benefits that you may receive if purchasing, renting services, which healthcare is a service industry. So to make our opinions as valid as they can or accurate as they can, we have to anticipate where the laws are moving or where reimbursements moving in healthcare, technology, competition, or the other factors that influence how healthcare is not only delivered but paid for in this country.
What do you see as some of the notable trends in healthcare right now that are impacting valuation?
So I think probably first and foremost, and if you've heard us say this before in any of our sessions, we have, but definitely the move to value-based care. It's certainly been a long slog getting there, but certainly with some of the regulatory changes that have happened in the past couple of years to the Stark Law and the anti-kickback statute, the government's trying to remove those barriers that have been in place to push forward value-based care. Like Todd said, healthcare is largely a service industry. So, being able to move to a different way of paying, providers, not just physicians, but also hospitals and other types of healthcare facilities takes a long time. But what we're also seeing, and we'll talk about in our session, is that there's a lot of non-traditional players coming into the healthcare industry space. And a lot of it is because they think they can make a better widget, right? Mark Cuban thinks he can bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals. Amazon thinks that they can deliver more efficient, cost-effective care. So there's a lot of these, new players in the industry that are coming in and trying to do it better and doing it in a value-based type of way. And I think for the past few years, the government has really sat back and watched and see how they're interacting with other healthcare providers, because they don't always fall under the traditional definitions that would allow them to be regulated under fraud and abuse laws. But now we're really seeing the government, like Todd said, in a reactionary way, get involved, especially as regards private equity firms. So we'll talk a little bit about what the government's reaction has been and how that's affecting those transactions.
Right. And when you talk about value-based care, what is value? It's kind of that continuum between outcomes when we're talking about healthcare and cost. One is much more subjective than the other, outcomes. The cost, that's real money, bottom line stuff. And that's where we see a lot of what they call value, a reduction of cost. And so we're seeing these new payment mechanisms and methodologies. I think the word is disruption we see in healthcare. There's been very little of that so far. And that's where we see these non-traditional healthcare providers come in and they think that they can disrupt the system and reduce costs. And probably what takes the hit might be quality, because it's a very much service industry. And not only how that's being compensated as far as revenue coming in, but the largest expense from most healthcare organizations and facilities are the payment to the physicians or the providers. It's compensation. And that has taken on the most scrutiny of anything that we've seen in healthcare. And that turns out to be half of the work that I perform as a healthcare appraiser is looking at physician and other provider compensation arrangements. That's where the government's going after for fraud and abuse and a kickback in different other stark relationships. And so physician compensation has been a really growing part of our practice and an opportunity for other appraisers. If you want to get into healthcare, that tends to be a large part of what we perform. Even if you're performing a business valuation, we have to look at the owner compensation, normalize that. And so in a way, we're already performing provider physician compensation valuation work.
We have about 5 minutes left. I'm just going to bring up a question relative to compensation, as long as you've touched on that. I know personally, I've been involved with members of NACVA negotiating with the IRS on reasonable compensation relative to healthcare and IRS issues. But I understand there's another association. I've recently read that the American Association for Provider Compensation Professionals, the AAPCP, they're developing a credential for provider compensation valuation. What can you tell us about that?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm familiar with that organization. I attend the meetings of that organization. It's getting a lot of traction. I've spoken about that organization in past NACBA conferences. I think it tends to go hand in hand with business valuation and what all the concepts and the techniques that we've learned as business appraisers. It tends to lend itself to physician compensation valuation, or what's being called CB, compensation valuation profession. In healthcare, typically these are service organizations. And so we're already familiar with appraising services. And so, and sometimes in healthcare, these service compensation arrangements tend to be the entirety of the business that we're appraising. So it just makes sense that that there might be a separate certification for that type of work. And I think certainly as business appraisers and in the science and as much the art that we've learned through this organization will lend itself to maybe a new credential. And I think the AAPCP is taking the lead there. So it's something worth checking into if you're in healthcare valuation.
And do you have any specific external sources that you might recommend to members? I know you've got an extensive set of data sets, but any particular ones you want to bring up to them relative to compensation, healthcare valuation that you might want to share with them?
Well, that's literally the $1 million question. These surveys are very, very expensive out there. And like the MGMA, the American Medical Group Association, Sullivan Cotter, the Hay Group, there's many that cost a lot of money. There are some that are free as well. And so mining both of those are great. CMS is a great source of information when you want to go into any kind of healthcare valuation engagement. Granted, it's a few years in arrears, that information, but even the survey data that we purchase, as we move more to value-based reimbursement, that's how physicians and providers are being compensated, is based upon the incentives that in which the parent organization or the employer is getting paid, getting reimbursed for the services being provided. So though even the surveys that we do purchase are still a little bit outdated because it's more on a fee for service, volume-based reimbursement. For instance, compensation per patient seen, compensation per work review. And that's not value-based care. That's more fee for service, volume-based, getting paid more for the more services you're providing. That's where healthcare is trying to get away from. And it's trying to incentivize quality, reduction of costs. And those surveys are not quite there yet. So we have to think outside the box and maybe even go outside of healthcare for some proxies for some of the value-based reimbursement, and therefore compensation work that we're doing. And I think therefore is the importance of a compensation valuation profession.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but I just want to remind everybody this afternoon from 1 to 2:40 Mountain Time or 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, healthcare regulatory updates and valuation implications. You've got two of the foremost experts in the country on this. I'm going to be attending that, and I hope that you can too. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you Mel and Brian.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Todd and Jessica. I think that this actually speaks to when we have this kind of fluctuation, this kind of developments, a huge growth opportunity for us as professionals to set ourselves apart, to be unique, to create additional value, and do this. I think that I'm looking forward to your session because of that. I think that there's some cool opportunities coming our way in this arena.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I want to make sure you take away from this. And, healthcare, while it's only 20% of our economy, it's 20% of our economy. And we've lost professionals within our organization who didn't want to be pigeonholed in one industry, but because it takes a lot and to keep up to date what's going on in our industry, it's tough to be a generalist and work in healthcare.
It may be 20% of the economy, but I think if you, from a societal
Well-
standpoint, it's a large amount of mind share because everyone's thinking about their own healthcare.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially as there's an aging population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of an emerging industry, cannabis is
Yeah.
certainly a big one. We'll be joined by Ed Mofrad. And thank you again, Todd and Jess,
Yeah.
for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad you could be with us and have a great
Good to be here.
session
Yeah.
this afternoon. And we've got the Ed Mofrad online with Ron Sr., who also is presenting at our conference on the ever so hot on fire topic
My
of
two
cannabis.
very favorite gentlemen, Brian and Mel. How could I start the morning than an introduction by these two fine gentlemen?
Hi, Ed. Hi, Ron.
It's good to see you virtually, albeit. Ron, it's my pleasure, my honor really to be interviewing you. Ron is a great guy. I've had the opportunity, the pleasure of getting to know him a little bit beforehand. Mr. Ron Sainor, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. It's one of those really, really difficult spelling last names. I've seen from Colorado. And he will be talking about, I call him the cannabis king because he has a lot of information and he'll be sharing it with us this morning. Ron, great to meet you in public on this forum. Tell us a little bit about, in your own words, your firm and the emphasis you have on cannabis, tax compliance, and the appraisal work, please.
Well, Ed, thank you for that introduction. I like Cannabis King better than I've had people walking up to me recently going, "Hey, you're the pot guy, aren't you?"
That works
My
too.
mother could see me now. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan in the 60s and 70s. And I tell people that, I studied the retail side of the business back in the 70s out of my dorm room a little bit. So I feel like I've come back full circle. But I'm based in Colorado. Our office is in Lakewood, a western suburb of Denver. I call it a half traditional, half non-traditional firm. We've got 14 people. I've got 3 partners. We do a lot of tax compliance and other attestation work. I have a partner who's very well known for animal hospitals and veterinarians. That's kind of a niche in our firm. But I've been doing valuation work for almost 40 years. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, along comes cannabis. And I think that's partly due to just being in Denver, which is kind of the epicenter of kind of where it started. And so I started to get people inquiring, saying, can you value a cannabis business? Can you value a cannabis license for local stuff here in the Colorado market? And from that, we published a book. My partner, Brenda Clark, and another colleague, Stacy Udell, they're both CVAs. Brenda's with me here in Denver, and Stacy hails out of Southern Jersey. We're just in the process of working on a second edition to the Cannabis Accounting and Appraisal Guide, which we hope to be out by year end. So that's been kind of fun. But it's also helped us to expand our kind of footprint in doing cannabis industry work. So I still do auto dealerships and dental practices and Mexican restaurants. And I feel like I've been kind of put in a box like you're the cannabis king, which is, first I was a little annoyed by it, but now I'm kind of, yeah, I am the cannabis king because we've been doing so much of it. It's a fascinating segment. I've said it's valuation on steroids because it takes everything that we've learned about doing valuation. All the fundamentals still apply, the approaches and methods and standards, but you layer on top of that phenomenal unsystematic industry and enterprise risk. It's a startup industry. All of the valuation is very jurisdictionally specific. That's important to understand. That's a key point, that the rules and regulations and license rights vary dramatically from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's more established jurisdictions like Oregon, Colorado, Alaska, and California, which has got its own issues. And then there's what we call the emerging markets. We're doing work in New Mexico that just flipped the switch on recreational on the 1st of this year. Michigan, that's had it for a year and a half. We're doing a lot of work in Nevada and Illinois and some stuff back east in Virginia. And it's fascinating kind of watching the country evolve towards state legal regulated cannabis.
Ron, you took my next question right out of my mouth. I was going to ask you about jurisdictions. So I'm in California. California and Colorado, of course, are two leading states in this arena. My question, California is, of course, such a huge state. So my question is, what parts of California fall under your jurisdiction, if not all of it? And then do you focus any more on one area of California than other?
Great question, Ed. And, you know, California has roughly 1,800 municipalities, but state legal regulated cannabis is only accessible in 300 of those 1,800 municipalities. So people have this misconception that, oh, cannabis is legal in Colorado, it's legal in California. Well, it may be legal at the state level, but then each municipality and each county have their city councils and their county commissioners that are either for it or against it. And it's just been fascinating watching the landscape change. I live in Golden, Colorado, which is a western suburb of Denver, and the far western suburbs of Denver have been, you know, not in my backyard. If you wanted cannabis in Colorado, you needed to travel into Denver or Aurora or Glendale or a few small municipalities. In the western suburbs like Littleton and Arvada and Morrison and Evergreen and Golden and Lakewood didn't allow it at the state level. Now they're seeing the benefits of the tax revenue, and they're seeing that it really hasn't caused, you know, social disruption. So I'm using Colorado, but the same thing's happening in California. California's got a whole interesting phenomenon because there's so much illicit activity in California that's been going on there for decades, and they can't figure out how to shut it down. They also kind of have the blinders on. There are illegal dispensaries, storefront dispensaries that are allowed to operate in certain parts of California where you can go into a illegal dispensary and buy your cannabis, and it's not subject to state regulation. For the life of me, I can't understand how they haven't shut that down.
Now, what are some of the unique challenges for when it comes to appraising a cannabis enterprise or establishment and its intellectual property, if you will, that you don't see in other fields? Yes.
Well, a good example of that is because it's such a new industry, we end up using a lot of discounted cash flow under the income approach to value, where we work with management to project out the cash flow from the enterprise, and then we discount it with an appropriate risk-adjusted rate with an unsystematic risk that might be 15 to 20 to 25%. I mean, that's enough to, you know, I remember Dr. Shannon Pratt years ago, and it might have been at a NACFA conference, saying, you know, unsystematic risk should be between 2 and 8%. It's very unusual for it to be lower or higher, and everybody wrote that down because it was the great Shannon Pratt. Now we're doing cannabis where it's not unusual to add 15 or 20% unsystematic risk because of the federal illegality and all the other issues. But just another nuance, just to kind of blend that together, we have to tax affect the benefit stream, right? That's what we're taught. You got to apples to apples. If we're using a, you know, after-tax discount rate, we need an after-tax benefit stream. We have something called 280E in cannabis, meaning you can't deduct other than cost of goods sold expenses. So you need a tax effect taking 280E into account. And there's a lot of people thinking that at some point that's going to end. There's going to be federal reform. Cannabis is going to be taken off of the Controlled Substance Act that was enacted under the Nixon administration in 1970. And all of a sudden, the 280E tax burden could go away at the federal level. And that will be a tsunami for the industry, well beyond the tax affecting issue, because it will allow interstate commerce and other things to happen.
Now, this is one of the biggest anomalies I've seen in my career and my time, that something is illegal on the federal level, but legal on state levels, on some state levels, and still illegal in other states. How do people in this industry deal with this, with being illegal on one level, on the federal level, and legal in other levels? Please talk about that.
Again, great question, Ed. There's a couple different perspectives on that question. One is just the ethical side of it. Because cannabis is illegal, it's marijuana. It's kind of morphed into be calling cannabis. The cannabis plant is also hemp if it doesn't have sufficient THC in it to make it psychoactive. The tomato plant is actually a derivative of the cannabis plant, but marijuana is subject to the Controlled Substance Act. And so part of the problem is because it's subject to that federal illegality, you can be accused of aiding and abetting if you're helping an illegal business at the federal level. Initially, when we first started doing this back in 2009 and 10, I didn't sleep as well as I do today at night, because that specter was still there for accountants and lawyers and advisors. I think that horse has left the barn. Most state boards of accountancy, if you're a CPA, have passed position statements saying as long as you pay attention to your other professional standards, the code of conduct, you're okay to work with a state legal regulated cannabis business. But that specter of it being federally illegal is still out there.
And banking is one of these great challenges, because banks, as you know, are guided by the federal laws and regulations. And I know some of our clients have had great difficulty with banking. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Colorado has pretty much solved the banking problem with state chartered credit unions and has been a pioneer. There's actually a person here, to just as an indication of how the industry has evolved. I just got done being part of the AICPA 3-day cannabis conference that was held here in Denver. So they've expanded from having a session maybe at Engage to having it a 3-day conference on attestation and taxation and valuation and other parts. But we had Sunday Siegfried, who's the CEO of Partner Credit Union, who developed what's called safe harbor banking for banking cannabis, and she's now working in 14 different states. Also relevant to this, the Safe Banking Act that's passed 7 times in the House of Representatives under the sponsorship of Ed Perlmutter, who's my congressman here in my district, has passed the House 7 times, but it's been stuck in the Senate. People keep thinking at some point the Senate's going to pass safe banking. They're trying to load it up with maybe some veterans' rights under the social equity components to get safe banking, which would allow Chase and Citibank and Wells Fargo to bank cannabis and solve that problem in other jurisdictions. But for now, most states you can find limited banking, at least can't get conventional loans, but you can at least deposit funds, electronic submit payroll through a credit union relationship.
Now, do you feel at some point it's going to become legal all over the country on a federal level?
Oh, I do. I think it's only a matter of time. I think it's a political football right now in the Senate. But Chuck Schumer is a lead sponsor of something called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which I'll talk about a little bit in my session, that would pass all the bills that have been passed in the House and send it on to the White House for approval. Right now, it's kind of like we don't want to, as you know, nobody wants to give anybody an advantage, so it's kind of been hung up. But there are signs that it will pass. If it got to the Senate floor, that they've got the votes to pass legal cannabis, so it's going to happen at some point. Whether it happens this year, next year, the year beyond is everybody's guess.
I know here in California, when it first became legal, a lot of people were complaining that to do it legal, it cost them a lot more than to do the old-fashioned way how they used to do it. And they were saying they were going to go bankrupt because there's so many costs, so many red tape costs to go through. Do you think that's going to level out eventually as the industry matures and comes out of its infancy?
I do, but it's going to take time, and it creates tremendous opportunity for business appraisers. Answer my polling question here, so keep that going. A tremendous opportunity because there's going to be a lot of change and evolution as it evolves from where it is today to being federally legal. There will be a lot of consolidation of licenses. I think there's going to be, the big boys or gals are going to come in and take over cultivation, and I think branding will be very, very important. Location is becoming critical to, especially on the retail side. But eventually, when the feds legalize it, you're going to see a lot of changes. The market right now is in a total funk. It is because there's overproduction. The irrational exuberance of money chasing cannabis a lot of the public money is down in the dumps right now in terms of the values. Typically, they're Canadian public companies that trade on U.S. exchanges are in the doldrums right now. But a lot of people say when the feds legalize it, you'll see that pick back up.
Forgive me for going so fast. We got a very limited amount of time, and I just want to make sure I cover, at least touch on all the main areas. Some of our colleagues want to get into this business. I'm sure even as we're talking, they're thinking about it. Do you have any tips for somebody who wants to break in to do valuation or even tax and accounting for the cannabis industry?
Yeah, a couple good resources. Shameless plug for our book, which you can get at canavaluation.com. But I would say make an investment to go attend MJ BizCon, which is the annual exposition of cannabis, everything cannabis on a global basis.
Can you spell that for us?
MJ BIZCON. If you just Google MJ BIZCON Las Vegas, you'll find it. It's November 14 through 18. They have an exhibition hall. The last time they had 1,800 vendors of everything. It's just incredible to look at the technology and the innovation and the branding and the extraction equipment. Lots of good educational sessions. Last year they had 24,000 people attended. It's been down a little bit from cannabis, but they've had 35,000 when it was pre-cannabis. Just walk the exhibit hall. You'll learn a lot about the industry. But there's also a lot of good emerging information. Marijuana Business Daily, who sponsors MJ BizCon, publishes a free magazine, and they have what's called the Marijuana Fact Book that costs about $275, filled with great metrics and statistical information on the industry. They have a hemp fact book as well. So if you're dealing with hemp CBD, there's a lot of good information there.
You don't have a copy of your book handy, so you can hold it up so you can see what.
No, I don't have one in front of me, but I've got all these resources on slides that I'll be going through at the end of our presentation later today. There's Viridian Capital Advisors has a lot of information. FTI Consulting, a very well-known valuation forensic firm, published a 428-page global cannabis guide that gives information on each state and each country. This is not just a U.S. phenomenon. Things are happening around the world. We're right now being considered for a 100-acre cultivation facility on an island off of Panama City that would produce cannabis to be exported to Europe.
Okay, I'm getting angry messages in all caps that I need to wrap up. So
okay.
I'm looking forward to your session later today, Ron, very much so. I'm just informally getting to know Ron to prepare for this interview. He's so full of resources and so full of information about my state, California. He's not even here. So he's a great guy to reach out to. And I look forward to, like I said, your session. And I'm sure everybody who will attend will learn a lot more. Thank you, Ron. And
I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning.
Thank
Thank you
you
for
Mel.
rolling that up, Ron, and smoking it. It's good to see you too, Ron. We appreciate
Yeah.
it. And Ed, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's a nice way to end the around the valuation world this morning with a little high notes.
There's Doritos
See,
outside.
there's more. I'm just going to keep this going. So thanks to our guests this morning, Josh Horn and Trish Garth-Hefner, who gave us some updates on our standards. You can, as Josh mentioned, nacva.com/standards and pick up there, download some charts for standards, glossary, also question and answers if you got some questions. Todd and Jess, thank you for bringing us up to speed on the incredible world of healthcare. And Ron, getting us a little Rocky Mountain High this morning. So enjoy your conference. Just a reminder for those of you online when you're attending your sessions to respond to all those poll questions. And for those of you who are just joining us here in Salt Lake, all the sessions you come in and out of, you'll need to scan your badge so you get your CPE credit. Thank you for joining us. Have a great conference.